I watched my husband's children smirk like hyenas around that mahogany conference table, waiting for the moment when the will would prove what they would whispered behind my back for months, that I meant nothing. When the lawyer finished reading and my name hadn't been mentioned once, Marcus actually chuckled under his breath and said, "Finally, some clarity." That is when I reached into my leather purse and handed the attorney a thick envelope sealed with red wax. Inside were documents that would wipe those smug expressions clean off their faces, because everything they thought they would stolen had already been mine for months. Before we dive in, please hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss stories like this one. Drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. I love hearing from all of you. My name is Eleanor Patricia Murphy. I am 71 years old, and I spent that Tuesday morning in downtown Portland's most expensive law office, feeling like a stranger at my own funeral. I wore my charcoal wool dress, the one Thomas said made me look distinguished, and carried his father's pocket watch in my coat, thinking today would be about honoring 42 years of marriage, not watching his son and daughter carve me up like leftover turkey. The office smelled like leather and old money, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Columbia River. Everyone avoided eye contact except Marcus, who stared at me with the same cold calculation I would seen when he was 12, and got caught stealing from my jewelry box. "About time Dad got his priorities straight," he muttered as the attorney closed the will, and confirmed what we all heard. My name wasn't anywhere in those pages. Not for the Victorian house I would scrubbed every weekend since 1982. Not for the mountain cabin where I would painted every room twice. Not even for Thomas's vintage fishing gear collection that I would helped him organize for decades. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I just watched Marcus straighten his Italian tie, while his half-sister Sophia was already texting someone, probably her real estate contact. The attorney, poor man, looked like he wanted to disappear into the Persian rug beneath his Oxfords. "Is there anything else to address today?" Marcus asked. Checking his Rolex like this was just another business meeting. That is when I spoke, calm as morning coffee. "Actually, there is something else." I reached into my purse, not my everyday canvas bag, but the structured leather one with the reinforced bottom that I used for carrying important things, and placed a manila envelope on the glossy table. I didn't look at anyone while the attorney opened it, but I watched his face turn pale as fresh snow. He examined the contents twice, then stared at me like I would just performed a miracle. "Mrs. Murphy, where did you obtain these documents?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "From my husband," I replied. "6 weeks ago, in our kitchen, using the same Mont Blanc pen he signed the original will with." The envelope contained updated property deeds, properly notarized and filed with the county, transferring everything to my name. But that wasn't what made Sophia's iPhone slip from her manicured fingers. It was the small digital recorder clipped inside the envelope, labeled Thomas's final testimony in my careful handwriting. I finally looked at Marcus. His smirk had vanished, replaced by that nervous tick where he rubbed his left temple, the same tell he would had since childhood when caught in a lie. "What the hell is this supposed to be?" he demanded, his voice cracking like a teenager's. I didn't answer. I simply stood, gathered my coat, and walked out of that office like it was burning behind me. Because it was. Let them figure out how to explain what just happened. Let them wonder what else I had hidden away. Let them finally understand that underestimating the grieving widow was their first and biggest mistake. I didn't drive straight home after leaving that office. I needed time to think, to breathe, to let the adrenaline settle before facing whatever came next. So I drove east toward the Cascade foothills, to the little roadside diner where Thomas and I used to stop after visiting his mother's grave each spring. The place with the cracked vinyl booths and the waitress who remembered everyone's order after one visit. I slid into our usual corner booth and ordered black coffee and apple pie without thinking about it. The moment I was alone, the rush of victory faded, leaving me feeling hollow and exhausted. It wasn't about the money or the property, though both mattered. It was about being erased, treated like I would never existed, never sacrificed, never mattered to the man they claimed to love. Marcus thought he would won something today. Sophia sat there like she was already planning which rooms to renovate first. They saw me as an obstacle to their inheritance, not as the woman who had raised Marcus from age 8, when his mother abandoned him, or who had covered Sophia's credit card debts 3 times without telling Thomas. 6 weeks before Thomas died, when he was still lucid and fighting and more himself than he would been in months, we sat in that same kitchen they now considered theirs, and had the conversation that changed everything. He told me he didn't trust how Marcus kept hovering around, offering to handle paperwork, asking suspicious questions about bank accounts and medical decisions. "Eleanor," he said, gripping my hand with fingers that shook but held firm, "I need to make things right before it is too late." We printed the property transfer forms from the county website that very night. He signed them with his reading glasses sliding down his nose, and called our neighbor Robert, who happened to be a notary public, to come by after dinner and make it official. "We didn't tell the children," Thomas said. "Let it be a surprise when the time comes." I thought he meant a pleasant one. I had no idea how dark things would get. After Thomas started declining, forgetting conversations, mixing up medications, sleeping 16 hours a day, Marcus swooped in like a concerned son, saying I looked overwhelmed and needed help. He moved into the guest bedroom without being invited, started intercepting phone calls from doctors, even told the hospice nurse that I was too emotional to be included in care decisions. Slowly, I was pushed out of my own life. Medical staff stopped updating me. The family attorney said Thomas had already made his wishes clear. Everyone told me to rest, to let Marcus handle the complicated stuff. I should have fought harder then. I should have screamed, but I still believed Marcus had some trace of the boy I would bandaged and fed and driven to soccer practice for 10 years. I thought after everything I would done for him, lying to his father about the dented fender, covering his college drinking citations, even helping him get his first job through Thomas's connections, he would show some basic decency. I was wrong. He never saw me as family. And Sophia was worse. She barely spoke, but that calculating look in her eyes today told me everything. They wanted me gone completely, and for a brief moment, they thought they would succeeded. I finished my coffee and drove home slower than usual, thinking about the next phase. The envelope had served its purpose. It planted fear and confusion. But that was just the opening move. What they didn't know was that I would documented everything. Voice recordings, email printouts, even security camera footage of Thomas telling Marcus to stop interfering just days before he passed. The war had started, and this time I wasn't backing down. The next morning, I woke before dawn for the first time in months. Instead of lying there staring at the ceiling and wondering how my life had gone so wrong, I had purpose. I pulled on my thick bathrobe, the burgundy one, with the coffee stain that Thomas always said made me look like a queen in disguise and made coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Standing at the kitchen window, watching fog roll through the Douglas firs in our backyard, I felt something I hadn't experienced since the funeral. Determination. Not anger exactly, but something steadier and more dangerous, the quiet resolve that builds when you have been overlooked and underestimated for too long. I walked into Thomas's study, the room Marcus had tried to claim as his office when he moved in, and opened the hidden safe behind the family photo wall. Inside was the real folder, the original documents, not the copies I would shown yesterday. Everything was there. Notarized deeds, time-stamped video files of Thomas signing them, receipts for legal consultations, even an email Thomas had sent to his physician, confirming his mental competency just weeks before his death. I also had backup recordings stored in a safety deposit box across town, and digital copies uploaded to a secure cloud server that only I could access. I wasn't taking any chances. Sitting at Thomas's desk, I made a list of what I had, and what I still needed. A second legal opinion from an attorney who had never worked with our family, digital backups sent to my estranged daughter Patricia in Seattle, and a plan for when Marcus inevitably tried to strike back, because I knew he would. Sure enough, by early afternoon there was aggressive knocking at the front door. Not the doorbell. Marcus was pounding like he was conducting a raid. I watched through the security camera as he stood there in his $1,000 suit, holding a manila envelope and practicing whatever performance he had prepared. I didn't answer. After 5 minutes of increasingly loud knocking, he bent down and shoved the envelope through the mail slot. The moment his BMW pulled away, I retrieved it. Inside were photocopies of what appeared to be an updated will, dated just 2 weeks before Thomas died, along with a formal eviction notice signed by Marcus himself, claiming I was an unauthorized occupant of his inherited property. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from amazement at how quickly he was moving. He really believed I was finished. One legal scare would send me packing with my tail between my legs. What Marcus didn't know was that I would already contacted Robert, our notary neighbor, and asked him to provide written testimony about what he witnessed 6 weeks ago. Robert didn't hesitate, said he remembered every detail of that evening, including Thomas's clarity of mind and his specific instructions about keeping the transfer confidential. I had allies Marcus didn't know about. I had evidence he couldn't forge, and I had something he would never possessed, a soul that wasn't corrupted by greed. That evening, I opened my laptop and composed an email to Patricia. It took 40 minutes to write the first paragraph, and another 20 to work up the courage to hit send. I hadn't spoken to my daughter in 3 years, not since she accused me of choosing Thomas over her after his first stroke. I attached the audio recording of Thomas's final message, the one where he explicitly stated his love for me and his concerns about his children's motives. If Marcus tried to take this to court, that recording would be the difference between victory and defeat. And maybe, just maybe, hearing her stepfather's voice would remind Patricia of who he really was underneath the complications, and she would stop blaming me for staying when she thought I should have left. The battle lines were drawn. This wasn't just about property anymore. This was about every year I would spend raising Marcus, maintaining that house, making Thomas feel cherished when his own blood relatives had the patience of gnats. Marcus hadn't just tried to steal assets, he would attempted to erase a lifetime of love and sacrifice. I wasn't going to let him succeed. 4 days after that, envelope appeared in my mail slot. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You are making a big mistake, old lady. Back off while you still can." I stared at the message for exactly 3 seconds, then burst out laughing, the kind of sharp, bitter laugh that sounds more like a release valve than humor. If Marcus thought he could intimidate me with anonymous threats typed by his fat thumbs and wounded pride, he would seriously miscalculated who he was dealing with. I screenshot the message, forwarded it to my attorney, along with the forged will and eviction papers, then called Robert to confirm our appointment at his office the following morning. "Eleanor, are you sure you want to open this can of worms?" he asked gently. "It is already open, Robert," I replied. "I am just making sure everyone can see what is crawling around inside." Sleep didn't come easily that night, partly from anticipation, but mostly from memories that kept surfacing like oil slicks, dark reminders of how long this disrespect had been building. I remembered Marcus calling me Dad's helper, instead of his stepmother, when introducing me to his college friends. I remembered Sophia rolling her eyes every time I offered advice about her failing marriage. I remembered holiday dinners where I cooked everything, but got seated at the far end of the table like hired help. But what kept me awake most was thinking about Patricia. I checked my email obsessively, hoping for some response to my message, but there was nothing. Maybe she would blocked my address years ago. Maybe she saw the subject line and deleted it without reading. Or maybe, and this thought both terrified and thrilled me, she was reading it over and over, trying to decide if I was worth forgiving. The next morning, I dressed with intention. Navy slacks, cream blazer, minimal jewelry. I wanted to look competent, not fragile. At Robert's office, he greeted me with coffee already brewed and documents spread across his conference table. We spent 2 hours going through everything: the property deeds, Thomas's signed affidavit, the video evidence, and the voice recording. Robert listened to Thomas's message 3 times, nodding slowly. "He knew they were coming for you," he said finally. "He just didn't know how fast they would move." When I asked if he would testify about Thomas's mental state when he signed the transfers, Robert didn't even pause. "Eleanor, I have known you both for 15 years. I know exactly who you are and what they are. Of course I will testify. Those words meant more than any legal document. Driving home, I stopped at the grocery store like it was any normal Thursday, and bought things I hadn't purchased in weeks. Fresh salmon, good olive oil, chocolate ice cream. For the first time since the funeral, I was shopping like I would be staying in my own home indefinitely. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the security keypad by the front door had been tampered with. Wires pulled loose, plastic housing cracked. It still functioned, but the message was clear. Marcus wanted me to know he could get close whenever he chose. I went inside, locked every door and window, then sat down and began printing everything. Physical copies of every email, photograph, and document. I labeled manila envelopes by date and sealed them in a waterproof box addressed to Patricia. If anything happened to me, she would know exactly where to look. Just after midnight, my laptop chimed with a new email. No sender name, no greeting, just one sentence. I listened to the recording. He didn't sound like the monster I remembered. It was from Patricia. My hands shook as I read those words 5 times in a row. That single line cracked something open inside me that I would thought was permanently sealed. I whispered, "Thank you," into the darkness and closed my eyes, feeling less alone than I had in years. There was still a long fight ahead, but I wasn't facing it by myself anymore. The next morning brought the sound of my front gate opening, and for a wild moment, I wondered if Patricia had decided to come home after all these years. But when I peered through the living room curtains, it was Sophia standing there in her pristine white tennis outfit, looking like she would come straight from the country club, holding a Starbucks cup and her phone like she was doing me an enormous favor just by showing up. Before I could even consider opening the door, she was already talking loudly enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. "Eleanor, can we please discuss this like adults?" I opened the door but didn't invite her in, just leaned against the frame and waited. She launched into what sounded like a rehearsed speech about how everyone was stressed, and I was making the situation worse than it needed to be. How this whole legal mess could damage the family's reputation if I didn't find a graceful way to step back. She actually used those exact words, graceful way to step back, like I was some aging actress who would overstayed her welcome on stage. I stared at her, genuinely amazed at how someone could fake sincerity so completely without breaking character. "Let me guess," I said calmly. "Marcus sent you to clean up his mess." She looked genuinely offended. "No, I came because I care about you, Eleanor." But her eyes kept darting past me toward the house, toward Thomas's study where all the evidence was stored. That is when I saw it, real panic. The kind that slips out before you can control it. That is how I knew they were truly scared. If Sophia was here pretending to be reasonable, it meant the will they were pushing had serious problems, and they were trying to patch holes before everything collapsed. "Thanks for stopping by," I said, and closed the door in her face. The next day, my attorney called with news. Marcus's lawyer had requested a formal mediation session, claiming the family wanted to resolve this matter amicably, without further legal complications. Rich, considering they were the ones who had forged documents and filed eviction papers. I agreed to mediation, but only in a public venue with a neutral third party present. My lawyer cautioned that they would likely try to appear cooperative at first, before attempting something underhanded. "Good," I told him. "I hope they do, because now I have everything I need." The notarized deeds, Robert's sworn statement, Thomas's voice recording, and now Patricia's tentative reconnection, which told me she was watching this unfold. Maybe not ready to jump in, but at least not turning away anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I walked through the house in darkness, touching things I hadn't really noticed since Thomas died. His reading glasses on the nightstand, the worn spot on his favorite chair where his elbow always rested, the slightly askew picture frame we would never bother to straighten. I thought about how this house had always been mine in the ways that mattered most, not because of paperwork, but because I would lived every square inch of it. I would painted walls, fixed broken fixtures, planted the garden, hosted countless dinners, made it a home. I wasn't going to let some entitled children take it away with forged signatures and smug expressions. Sitting at the kitchen table, I opened my laptop and began drafting a press statement, one I would release if things got ugly. Names, Dates, facts, the complete truth. If Marcus wanted war, I would give him war, and I would win it without ever raising my voice. The mediation was scheduled for Friday morning at a downtown conference center that smelled like industrial carpet and stale coffee. I arrived 20 minutes early, dressed in the same navy suit I would worn to Thomas's company retirement dinner. The one he said made me look like someone who didn't lose. I sat in the waiting area with my hands folded, listening to fluorescent lights buzz overhead, and trying not to think about how satisfying it would be to watch Marcus's face when he realized how thoroughly he would underestimated me. When they called us in, I walked into that sterile conference room like I owned it, because in every way that mattered, I did. I took the seat directly across from Marcus and Sophia, who looked like they were attending a board meeting instead of a mediation about stolen inheritance. My attorney sat beside me, calm and prepared, with organized file folders containing every piece of evidence. Marcus had brought some slick young lawyer with styled hair, who clearly thought this would be easy money. The mediator, a no-nonsense woman with tired eyes and a take-charge attitude, opened with basic ground rules and asked if anyone wanted to make an opening statement. I looked directly at Marcus and said, "I am here to protect what my husband left me." He let out a dismissive snort and muttered, "What he left you was nothing." Before my lawyer could intervene, I leaned forward and replied, "No, what you left me was nothing. Thomas left me everything he didn't have time to officially reclaim." Then I pulled out the evidence packet, notarized deed copies, printed emails from Thomas to his physician, time-stamped video stills, and the audio recording transcript, and slid it across the table. For several seconds, the only sound was Sophia's nervous bracelet clicking against the table as she tried to pretend this wasn't unraveling in front of her. The mediator reviewed the documents, then looked at Marcus's lawyer. "Would you like to respond to these materials?" The young attorney hesitated, flipped through pages and said, "We will need time to verify the authenticity of these documents." "Perfect," I said, settling back in my chair as calm as a sunrise. I have all the time in the world, because I knew they hadn't expected this level of preparation. They thought I would bluff or fold or come begging for some minimal settlement, but I wasn't going anywhere. Not without dragging every lie they would told into the light. When the mediator called a recess, Marcus stormed out without a word. Sophia tried to act like she was just along for moral support, but I caught that flash of panic underneath her composed facade. They were scared, and they should be. That evening, I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine and checked my phone. Another email from Patricia. "I watched the video file you sent. You were telling the truth about everything." I closed my eyes and whispered another thank you into the cool evening air. For the first time in months, it felt like someone saw me not as a burden or obstacle or ghost, but as a woman, a mother, a person worth believing. I was barely halfway through my morning coffee when the doorbell rang the next day, sending my heart into that familiar double beat of panic I would developed since this whole mess started. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Sophia with another fake peace offering, or a courier with more threatening papers. It was a young woman in hospital scrubs, holding a small cardboard box, her eyes red from recent crying. "Are you Eleanor Murphy?" she asked. When I nodded, she handed me the box and said, "I was one of Mr. Murphy's day nurses. He asked me to give this to you if his children tried to cause trouble." She turned and walked away before I could ask her name or say thank you, leaving me standing there with this mysterious package like it might explode in my hands. I carried it to the kitchen table and stared at the tape seal for a full minute before cutting it open with my paring knife. Inside was a small leather journal, the brown one Thomas used to carry when he still went fishing with his brother every weekend, the one I thought had been lost years ago. Underneath that was a flash drive and a folded envelope with my name written in Thomas's careful handwriting. For a moment, I could swear I smelled his cologne, that expensive woody scent he wore on special occasions, the one I complained about, but would give anything to smell on him one more time. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The letter was dated 7 weeks before his death, and the first line read, "If you are reading this, then they succeeded in isolating you, and I failed to protect you like I promised." Suddenly, this wasn't just about proving ownership anymore. It was about hearing his voice, even through ink on paper. He wrote about how Marcus had begun monitoring his phone calls, recording their conversations without permission, even telling medical staff that Eleanor was too stressed to be trusted with important decisions. He described how Sophia would nod and seem supportive during visits, then not contact him for days afterward. How he would try to discuss his concerns with them directly, but they would deflect or change the subject, or make him feel like he was being paranoid. The flash drive, he explained, contained voice memos he would recorded late at night when no one else was around. Detailed accounts of his mental state, the timeline of his illness, and the real story of what happened during his final months. One recording, he promised, would explain everything clearly enough that no court could ignore it. I stared at that tiny piece of plastic, like it was Excalibur itself. It could either destroy or save everything I had left. I plugged it into my laptop, bracing myself for whatever I might hear. Thomas's voice came through the speakers clear and strong, not confused or fading, but angry and determined and completely aware. He detailed every manipulation Marcus had attempted, described how his original attorney had been replaced without his full understanding, explained the pressure he would felt to modify his will, and even provided specific dates when he would been given extra medication against his explicit wishes. By the time the fourth recording finished, tears were streaming down my face, not just because it was evidence, but because it was proof that I hadn't imagined anything. I hadn't been paranoid or jealous or possessive. What I would sensed all along was real. They would weaponized his illness, twisted his final days into something calculated and cruel. And I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to use Thomas's own words to burn their lies to the ground. The next few days felt like walking across thin ice with wolves circling below, because I knew I had something devastating in my possession now. Something that could completely destroy Marcus and Sophia's narrative if I used it correctly. But I also knew I had to be surgical about it, because one wrong move, and they would somehow twist it back onto me, paint me as the bitter widow fabricating drama from grief. I met with my attorney again, and we sat in his office surrounded by filing cabinets and the steady hum of an overworked air conditioning unit that couldn't quite handle the July heat. I laid out everything: Thomas's letter, the flash drive, the voice recordings, and watched his expression change as he listened to Thomas describe, in painful detail, how Marcus controlled his medications and how Sophia managed the family's public image while they systematically isolated him. When the recordings ended, my lawyer looked at me and said, "This changes everything." "Good," I replied, because everything is exactly what they tried to steal. We organized the evidence methodically: mental competency, property ownership, family interference, elder abuse. I made sure everything was backed up to 3 different cloud services and an encrypted drive that I wrapped in plastic and buried beneath the rose bushes in my backyard. While we built the legal case, the emotional weight kept pressing down on me. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Thomas's voice again. Not the sick, confused version they would try to convince me was real, but the man I would married. Sharp, protective, stubborn as granite. The grief hit me differently now. Not just sorrow for losing him, but rage at how they would stolen our ending, rewritten the final chapter of our marriage like I would never been part of the story. I knew a court battle was inevitable, but I also understood that sometimes public pressure moved faster than legal proceedings. So I wrote a simple direct letter and sent it to 3 local newspapers, 2 television stations, and a legal blog that specialized in elder abuse cases. I attached a redacted version of the transcript and a brief statement explaining how I would been silenced, manipulated, and erased. But not anymore. Within 48 hours, my phone was ringing constantly. Reporters requesting interviews, attorneys offering assistance, elder advocacy groups reaching out with support. I ignored most calls, but I did speak with a woman named Catherine, who ran a nonprofit for women over 60 facing housing displacement after losing their spouses. When she said, "We hear stories like yours constantly, but rarely with this level of documentation," I felt something settle in my chest, like finally, someone understood the pattern instead of just the individual pieces. That night, Sitting in the living room with Thomas's memory box on my lap, I received another email from Patricia. This one was longer, more hesitant, full of pauses and guilt. I should have believed you years ago. I was young and scared, and when you didn't leave him, I thought you chose him over me. Maybe you did, but I see now that maybe you didn't have real choices. I am sorry I wasn't there when you needed support. By the time I finished reading, I was crying again. The kind of tears that shake your whole body, not just from pain, but because something frozen was finally thawing. I wrote back without overthinking. You were right to be scared. I should have listened to you. I am sorry. I wasn't the mother you needed. I hit send before I could guess myself. For the first time in years, it felt like something was healing instead of breaking. It was inevitable that Marcus would retaliate, and he did it exactly the way I expected, loud, messy, and vicious. 3 days after my statement started circulating online, I woke to find my entire front porch covered with photocopied flyers, printed on what looked like official letterhead, but was clearly produced on someone's home printer. The flyers claimed I was under investigation for elder abuse, that I would manipulated Thomas into signing documents while he was mentally incompetent, that I would isolated him from his family, and intentionally prevented communication to gain control of his assets. It was such a pathetic reversal of reality that I almost laughed, but I understood what Marcus was really trying to do. Get ahead of the truth. Poison public opinion before people could hear the complete story. I gathered every single flyer, photographed the pile, and sent the image to my attorney with a note. He is escalating. The response came back immediately, filing harassment charges, and requesting a protective order this afternoon. That gave me some relief, but unease still sat heavy in my stomach. It got worse when I heard from Thomas's old friend William, who owned the hardware store downtown. He told me Marcus had approached him the week before, asking for security footage from the store's parking lot on a specific day in March, when Thomas and I had shopped there together. William said he would found the request odd, but hadn't realized what Marcus was planning. I thanked him for calling and added his name to my growing list of potential witnesses who remembered the truth, not the version Marcus was trying to construct. That night, lying in bed with the house locked tight and my phone charging beside me, I scrolled through every email Patricia had sent, reading between the lines, feeling out the hesitation and fear and slow thaw of a daughter, trying to find her way back to a relationship she would thought was beyond repair. My heart ached for her not just as a mother, but as a woman who understood what it meant to carry damage that wasn't originally yours, but still lived inside you like a permanent scar. Just before midnight, she replied to my last message. If you are still okay with it, I would like to visit this weekend. Not for anything dramatic, just to see you and talk. I didn't even breathe before typing back. Yes, absolutely. I will be here whenever you are ready. After hitting send, I sat in the darkness and whispered my 100th thank you of the month. Because no matter how ugly this fight became, no matter what Marcus tried next, the one thing he couldn't take back was the fact that my daughter was coming home. That meant something real was growing again, even in the middle of all this destruction. Patricia pulled into my driveway just after 2 on Saturday afternoon, and I was already positioned at the window, trying not to look too eager but probably failing completely. The moment I saw her step out of her silver Honda, I felt this nervous, electric energy rise up in me like I was decades younger. There she was, standing by her car with arms crossed, looking uncertain whether to knock or just drive away. When I opened the door, neither of us spoke at first. We just looked at each other across years of silence and hurt and misunderstanding. Finally, she said hi softly, and I said hi back, even softer, and then we stood there, in that awkward space, where all our unfinished conversations had been living. I stepped aside, and she came in, and I closed the door behind her like I was trying to keep the entire world from following her inside. She looked around slowly, taking in the house like it was a place from a half-remembered dream. Her eyes landed on the photograph still displayed on the shelves, the one of her at 16 holding a tennis trophy, both of us squinting in bright sunlight, then on the hallway that used to lead to her bedroom, and finally back to me. You didn't change much, she observed. Didn't want to, I replied. We sat at the kitchen table where I would prepared 2 cups of tea I wasn't sure she still liked, along with chocolate chip cookies from a recipe she would written out when she was 13 that I would never had the heart to throw away. For a while we just sipped in silence. Not cold silence, but not warm yet either. Then she asked, was it always this difficult? And I knew she meant Thomas, the house, the tension, the way things had gotten twisted over time. I nodded slowly and said, not at first, but it became that way, and I stayed longer than I should have. She looked down at her teacup and said, I used to wait for you to leave him. My throat tightened, because I would always suspected that, but hearing her say, it brought all the old guilt rushing back like a tide. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. I should have left for you, and I am sorry. She didn't cry or pull away, just let our hands rest there for a long moment before saying, I know you are. I could have fallen apart right then, but I held it together because I could feel something healing happening between us, fragile and new, and I didn't want to scare it away. Eventually we moved to the living room where I showed her the folder, the documents, the recordings, Thomas's letter, not to make her feel sorry for me, but to show her the complete truth. All the messy, painful, undeniable facts. She read everything quietly, eyebrows drawn together, lips pressed tight. When she finished, she looked at me and said, they really tried to erase you completely. They thought they already had, I replied. She nodded like she understood more now than she ever had before. She stayed for almost 4 hours, long enough to walk through the garden with me, and ask if I still made cinnamon French toast on Sunday mornings like I used to when she was little. When she left, she hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe, and when I stepped back inside afterward and sat on the couch alone, I didn't feel hollow like I usually did. I felt full in a way I hadn't experienced in years, because for the first time in so long, something had come back to me instead of being taken away. This wasn't just about property or money or legal victories anymore. This was about rebuilding a life that Marcus and Sophia thought they would successfully demolished. Piece by piece, relationship by relationship, they would underestimated not just my determination, but my capacity to heal what they would try to break forever. The war wasn't over, but I was no longer fighting it alone, and that changed everything.